Corporation. The question is that the report of the Social Services Committee on the 2011-12 financial review of Housing New Zealand Corporation be noted.
Mr. Chairman.
The Honourable Dr. Nick Smith.
Mr. Chairman, I'm pleased to be speaking on the review from the Select Committee of Housing New Zealand, because we are embarking as a government on the most exciting and positive changes in social housing in a generation. And I want to just briefly talk both about the review and what those changes mean. The long-term assumption about Housing New Zealand is that it is the sole provider of social housing. In 2010, the government received the vision on social housing that's all about expanding the provision of social housing to just beyond the state. And we've seen with the budget announcements this year this ambition to expand the community provision of social housing up to 20%. I know in Australia, actually I'd ask members opposite to talk to their Labor colleagues in Australia about the success of expanding social housing beyond just the state entity, because the program that the government is embarking on is mirrored in Australia. Well, Mr. Robertson interjects and says, these reforms all started with Labor. Well, let's just look for a moment and say, well, what percentage of housing after 9 years of a Labor administration, how much community social housing was there? Less than a teeny-weeny 1%. And the second challenge I've got for the Deputy Leader of the Labor Party is that if he really believes in the report of the expansion of community social housing, why did his party vote against the bill in the budget that enables community social housing providers to be able to have access to the income-related rent subsidy? Why did you vote against it? If you're so committed to the community social housing sector, why would you say that the state subsidy is only available to Housing New Zealand? Equally so, Mr. Chairman, I'd want to draw the House's attention to the huge boost that this government is giving to improving both the quality of our social housing with Housing New Zealand and others, but also making sure it's in the right place and it's the right size. I reflect, Mr. Robertson, on the decisions of the previous government which robbed the funding for actually maintaining state houses, that saw them deteriorate to an appalling quality simply because they played a cynical game of just a count of the number of state houses. And I say to this House quite straight, I say to Mr. Prasad, who's interjecting, this government is committed to the quality of those houses, not just the quantity. Because actually, having tens of thousands of state houses that are uninsulated, that are the wrong size, is not the best way in which we can get the right social dividend for New Zealand from its $15 billion investment in Housing New Zealand. I asked the member, does he support the government's exciting initiative announced in the budget, Project 324, where we're going to take thousands of portable bedrooms, add them onto houses, change them from being 3-bedroom houses into 4-bedroom and 5-bedroom houses, reduce the overcrowding for those needy families, reduce the incidences of diseases like tuberculosis, like rheumatic fever, that we know are connected to overcrowding, and yet we've not heard a squeak from Labor members in support of that initiative from the government. The last point I want to make, Mr. Speaker, is this. Over the next 3 years, this government is going to invest $2.9 billion in the improvement of housing New Zealand. 2.9 billion. If you take the 9 years, that's almost $1 billion a year for my colleague from the West Coast. What was the average during the affluent years when money came easy prior to the global financial crisis? The previous government committed less than a third of that. Less than a third of that. That speaks louder than words and shows the level of commitment this government has to a better housing outcome.
That was 2 calls. Members, the question is that the report of the Social Services Committee on the 2011-12 financial review of Housing New Zealand Corporation be noted. Those of that opinion will say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. I understand the next entity members wish to debate is involved.